Jesus said that there would come a time when men's hearts would be failing them for fear, for all those things which would be coming upon the earth. What could that fear come from? L.A. Marzulli, we're going to talk about a frightening subject today. If you're safe in Christ, it's not so frightening. If you're out there reading the newspapers, I think there will be plenty to be afraid of. The subject, UFOs. And we're going to bravely step into the fray and talk about UFOs from a biblical perspective. Good to have you here with us.
Great to be here, Gary. Thanks so much.
Now, UFOs. Immediately, that term brings laughter, derision. Everybody's seen the little green men with the great big almond-shaped eyes, and immediately, of course, they've laughed those to scorn. It's just not true. And yet, the Bible says that we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, powers, against rulers of darkness in heavenly places. I think that includes dark forces that sometimes become visible. What do you think?
Oh, I agree. And, in your opening statement, you're quoting the words of Yeshua, quoting the words of Jesus, who states that men will faint from fear from what is coming upon the earth. That is a loaded, pregnant statement.
Yeah.
And we would do well to listen to that admonition and explore what he is talking about. And then in the next sentence, it says, men fainting from fear of the expectation of things which are coming upon the world, for the powers of the heavens will be shaken. And, what are we looking at here? What is manifesting on the planet? What has been manifesting on the planet in greater numbers since 1947, the end of World War II? And there's really only one phenomena that has been not only in the news, but has been global. All countries, people all over the world have seen unidentified flying objects. If it was one or two a year, I wouldn't be talking about it. It's now reaching to the point where it's thousands every month are being reported from all over the planet. The UFO phenomena, simply put, is real, burgeoning, not going away. As Christians, we need to address this. And are these really extraterrestrials from Zeta Reticuli or the Pleiades, or are they, in fact, interdimensional beings which have gone out of their way to set up a very elaborate deception? And is this, in fact, the coming great deception that the Bible warns us of?
And in fact, I would agree with you that it is. Writers for the past 50 years or so have been arguing alien presence, maybe even alien technology, aiding research and development on planet Earth. That theme, by the way, is an ancient theme, which we could talk about a little bit later. But everybody remembers Roswell, 1947. And when I think of that, I think two really significant things happened in 1947. Aliens landed, let's say crash landed, and Israel was on the road to becoming a state. The world sort of changed in that year, 1947, 48, and we began to hear about the government's involvement with UFOs, which was quickly squelched by the powers that be.
Very much so.
They don't want people to know about this, perhaps because they're in league with the forces that we're speaking of. Now, this is biblical to me. Alien forces trying to influence the course of humanity. To me, that is a biblical theme.
Absolutely. We read about this in the pseudepigraphical book, the Book of Enoch. It's not part of the canon, but interestingly enough, it's quoted about 70 times in the Tanakh, the Old Testament, and referred to in the New Testament. Interestingly enough, in further evidence, I sat down with Dr. Jesse Marcel Jr. His father, Jesse Marcel Sr., was at Roswell. In fact, he was the intelligence officer that went out to the so-called debris field and brought home a box of artifacts, which he sat in front of Jesse Marcel Jr. I got to interview Jesse, and I said, what was it like to see all this? And, look, his family was torn apart by this. His father was disgraced. The whole family was in basically They never changed their story in decades. And what they saw, what Jesse Marcel Sr. saw, was a wreckage of some sort of a craft that was not of this world. And interestingly enough, there's a shot with General Ramey sitting with Dr. Jesse Marcel Sr. in front of a weather balloon. This is this info story that the military in front of him, and he's holding this telegraph. And you can see the telegraph is sort of tilted down like this, so the camera can pick it up, but of course you can't read the writing. However, with the technology that we have in modernity, a researcher went in and blew that up, and guess what? There's a reference in the telegraph to disc. The word disc is used several times, and retrieve bodies. So we're not being told the truth. That's the bottom line.
Okay, now I have a biblical question here. Somebody out there is saying, wait a minute, if these are demons and not people from other galaxies, how in the world do they have hard materialistic ships that are made up of little things like I-beams and metal and so forth? Are you telling me that it's possible for the minions of Satan to actually have technology?
What's interesting is, again, we go back to the book of Enoch, but I'll throw some biblical references from the book of Revelation. The book of Enoch tells us very specifically that a group of fallen angels descended on Mount Hermon in the days of Jared. From that, there's a quid pro quo, there's a something for something. They offer technology to mankind in trade for the female population. That sets up the whole Genesis 6 account. Later on, we read the New Jerusalem descends, and it talks about the New Jerusalem. Jesus himself says there'll be many mansions. I go to prepare a place for you. Well, let's ask the question, who's building the city of Jerusalem? Who's building these mansions? Does God just snap his fingers and do they all just materialize? See, we don't know. Or do, in fact, the angelic host assist in this, and perhaps are architects, for lack of a better word, in some of this. And I realize that's a stretch, and that's conjecture on my part. I'll certainly admit that. But, I mean, they're not just sitting up there doing nothing. They're messengers. There's a war that's going on in an unseen dimension.
What you're saying is that not only is the supernatural real, as the Bible says that it is, Bible plainly says the supernatural is real. Many of the prophets of old, the apostles, experienced the supernatural in very physical ways. By the way, Elijah was taken to heaven in a fiery chariot, which is about as physical as it gets, I think. But not only is the spirit world real, it has a kind of technology. And men would literally die to get hold of that technology so that they could leap ahead of their competitors, I suppose.
And this is what we think has happened. Philip Corso wrote a book, we were discussing it off air. Philip Corso, the day after Roswell, talking about the technology that came to him, and then he funneled it out to the private sector.
Yes.
And that book is extremely controversial, I understand that. But we get these leaps in technology that, some people say, well, how do we have night vision goggles and the computer chip and some of these other things? And I understand that. You can go back and look and say, well, it came from this way. But Corso is saying that some of what we see is directly tied back to extraterrestrial technology, which was back engineered. So-called extraterrestrial technology, which was then back engineered.
Having established that, then let's go the next step, and let's talk about this unspeakable phenomenon known as alien abduction. And I'm holding your book, Further Evidence, here. L.A. Marzulli, by the way, has written Further Evidence of Close Encounters, in which you speak of abduction. And you actually were able to garner some evidence that what was going on was not a fiction,
very much so, right.
Not somebody's bad dream,
right.
Somebody's nightmare. It was really something that had a documentary quality to it.
Well, we did. Richard and I went and we interviewed Dr. David Jacobs, who has interviewed many people who claim to have been abducted. And when we first started talking about this 8, 9, 10 years ago, people laughed. It's just a bunch of nonsense. People really aren't being abducted. This is all sleep paralysis. And then we took it a step further, and we discovered that many of these people who claim to have been abducted had metallic implants put in them. In other words, they were implanted. And again, the skeptic was saying that's just nonsense. These are all bicycle parts or injuries from childhood or whatever. And what's interesting is we were able to prove in the Watchers series and also in further evidence that no, people are being abducted. Sperm is taken from the man, ovum from the woman. There is a breeding program that's going on. What about this scripture from Jesus? Don't we understand when he says, as in the days of Noah, it'll be when I return. I'm paraphrasing it. So it'll be when the Son of Man returns. And that begs the question, what differentiates the days of Noah? And that's the presence of the fallen angels.
Very good question, by the way. And most people, I think, in church, and I have nothing against church, but I believe church should be Bible study. I think you really ought to get deeply into the Word in church. And if you really study the days of Noah, you discover that they were characterized by an alien, if you will, intrusion. In the past, say 30 years ago, people were struggling with aliens or with UFO aliens, and some of them said, well, they're not extraterrestrials, they're ultra-terrestrials. They seem, when we study them, not to be physical as such. They're able to wink in and wink out, and they appear, and then they go through a little door and they're gone. And so a lot of researchers started calling them ultra-terrestrials instead of extraterrestrials. And I think the Bible sort of goes along with that. They pop in to do their dirty work, they pop back out again.
Bingo.
And they're leaving everybody with the impression that they're from some other planet.
And of course, this is the great cosmic ruse which is being played out in front of us. Everything is, if we just step back for a second and we look at where the globe is today, and we realize that the Darwinian paradigm has left this huge intellectual and spiritual vacuum in human beings. If we're really just thrown on this planet and it's all an accident, then where do we really come from? Movies like Prometheus talk about this. Where does man, how did we evolve, and who are our creators?
Right.
And of course, this points back to when Ben Stein, and I've talked about this, we've talked about this many times. Stein sits down in his movie Expelled, No Intelligence Allowed, sits down with Richard Dawkins. Richard, where does life come from? And all Dawkins can point to is that maybe it happened somewhere out there with a race of highly evolved extraterrestrials, that's called panspermia, who seeded us here. And what we're saying is, like, all we need to do, all the ancient astronaut, ancient alien crowd, UFO people need to do is just take one little step over this way and substitute the word fallen angel for extraterrestrial, and the phenomena mesh like this.
Suddenly
it
makes perfect sense. Particularly if you are an avid reader of the Bible, if you're born again, if you're led of the Spirit of God, it'll all pop into focus for you.
It will.
And what we have here is what you've termed the seed wars. That is the war over the purity of the human genome. And panspermia, sowing seed on this planet, which is a secular humanist explanation for all this, still has to do with the human genome, after all, and which is a biblical subject.
It does. And what I find interesting is that this outside agency is so concerned with us. They are deliberately taking sperm and ovum and doing something with it. I mean, they're taking genetic material, and we believe they are creating a race of hybrid beings. Well, you say, well, LA, that sounds really bizarre and really strange. Yet we get accounts from people who claim to have interaction with hybrid beings. In fact, we have, and we talked about this in On the Trail of the Nephilim too, but we had 4 hares. Real quick, we had 4 hares. That one of them was a red hair from a Peruvian mummy. The other one is a human hair, normal human hair. The other one is a human hair which has been dyed. The 4th hair, and this is where we're not in Kansas anymore, the 4th hair is almost white, and it came from a female hybrid being which forced herself on a man. In other words, they had sex. He was basically raped. And this is what happens in the alien abduction scenario. He had the presence of mind the next morning to notice that he had one of these hairs on him. We took it to a lab, all 4 hairs, and there's something called Raman spectroscopy, which measures the molecular structure of whatever you're looking at and plots it on a graph. And the human hair comes in on the graph and just kind of goes like this. The dyed human hair comes in on the graph and goes like this. This is where it's unbelievable, because the red hair from Peruvian mummy is about 2,000 years old. The white hair is from modernity, about 10, 15 years, okay? and they track like this. Every little nuance on the graph is reflected. They track with each other. The slope of the graph is almost identical.
And your conclusion is that something happened in ancient days that's
Yes.
happening again right now.
Which again validates the biblical narrative, as in the days of Noah. What else can Jesus be talking about that men would faint from fear from what is coming upon the earth? And it's manifesting in our day, and yet many people in the church refuse to even look at the evidence. And it's like cognitive dissonance. A little switch goes off and they just move away and they don't want to talk about it. And yet a modicum of research, 10, 15 minutes just on the internet alone, will show that some kind of a phenomena is going on and going on in greater numbers. And we need to deal with it. As Christians, we need to deal with it.
Let's take just a moment and talk about L.A.'s book. I mentioned Further Evidence a minute ago, a book that you have, I think, sold a number of these, but we need to talk about them right now. If you haven't read The Cosmic Chess Match, it lays out LA's view of what's happening, biblically speaking. That is to say, there's a war going on in the heavens. There is a dark force. There is the force of God. We see the war going on. It's described in the Bible. And now, in the days in which we live, the information is leaking through a little bit. And we're beginning to see the edges of that war that's been going on in heaven.
It's manifesting in ways that I've never seen before. And, you know, at some point in time when the great eviction notice happens and Michael wars with Satan's angels and they're booted out of the second heaven, is that the day of revealing? Is that the day when all of a sudden we go outside, if the church is still here, we go outside and we look up and, oh my gosh, you know, the mile-wide mothership? Or does it happen before then? All I know is even today in the news, one of Obama's cabinet members talking about he wished he had done Podesta, I think it was.
Yeah, John Podesta.
Who wished he had revealed more to the American public about the so-called extraterrestrial presence. It's all there. That, to me, is soft disclosure. When a man of that caliber comes out and says something like that, that's soft disclosure. Paul Hellyer, the former defense minister of the Canadian government, has stated, now he's making the rounds on different news shows, has stated openly that UFOs, we're quoting, and this was, of course, from Watcher 7, too, this quote, that UFOs are as real as the airplanes flying overhead. Wow. I mean, these are astounding statements, and we need to heed them.
Well, I was going to mention your DVD, Watchers 7, Further Evidence or Physical Evidence. And by the way, you can just, with your own eyes, see what we're talking about here. We're not talking about the figment of somebody's imagination. This phenomenon is beginning to impinge in visible ways upon humanity. Let me mention again, LA's book, Further Evidence, documents what we're talking about today in much greater detail than we're able to right now. The Cosmic Chess Match talks about the nature of the battle, and Watcher 7 is just fascinating because you'll see with your own eyes the artifacts, if you will, of alien abduction. All three of these books, yours for $59.95, and as a bonus, I have 7 DVDs, and what they are a collection of L.A. Marzulli live, various presentations that you've given in various places. Believe me, folks, when L.A. is live, he's live. He tells it like it is. L.A. Marzulli. Ask for the L.A. Marzulli UFO package. Check our website, prophecywatchers.com. We have a bookstore right there. You can see how to order these. Now, let's continue, because I'm getting interested at this point in time. The hypothesis is that what the Bible said about the days of Noah recurring again in our own day, in other words, there would be alien intrusions as there were in his day, and we're beginning to see that. What can we infer from all this as students of the Bible, as students of Bible prophecy?
I think one of the most disturbing and alarming dynamics of this whole bizarre intrusion into our world is the implant. And because we believe, and I've talked about this in the Cosmic Chess Match, we get these 4 criteria in the book of Revelation about the mark of the beast. And the one that we all know, can't buy, sell, or trade. And you go back 100 years and people would go, that's preposterous. How's that going to work? And yet we're here now. with the chips and the RFID chips and all that, we can see that a cashless society could work. But then there's 3 other criteria. The second one is that anyone who takes this mark, grievous sores will appear on the body. So something's going on with whatever this mark is messing with the nervous system, the biological system of a human being, doing something, shorting it out in some way that's not really beneficial. Then we read, again, in the book of Revelation, men and women will seek death in those days, but not find it. What days? The days of the mark, and not find it. Well, what do you mean not see death? Is that just a metaphor, or does this mark somehow not only elongate the human life, but make it disease-free on some level? The fourth one, to me, is the one that's extremely telling. Anyone who takes that mark will wind up in the lake of fire. You take the mark of the beast, you wind up in the lake of the fire. And that's something there's no grace and mercy being shown there. And what this means to me is that we take this 4 criteria. This mark, I believe, is a DNA manipulator. And the reason for this is, and this is why the damnation, this is why you wind up in the lake of fire. If a person receives that mark, and I believe it will be a free will choice, it won't be forced on you. It'll be a free will choice to take that mark. You take the mark, you become, through this DNA manipulating upgrade, that's probably how they'll couch it, you become essentially a modern day Nephilim. You become the spawn of the fallen one. Your DNA will change. And I find that incredibly alarming.
And you'll become enslaved to the dark side.
Absolutely. You will become enslaved.
So the mark and an implant, and you have written at length, and by the way, you have produced DVDs showing really the supernatural element in these alien implants. And that's another story. But when you start talking about that, you're bringing the supernatural now front and center. And I think back to Daniel, when he talks about the Antichrist. This man stands up and worships a God whom his fathers knew not. And as this God is described, it has all of the characteristics of an alien God. 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 talks about this man standing up in the temple of God and declaring himself to be God. Go to Revelation, the same man is apparently killed. His deadly wound is healed. He rises up and he lives on miraculously. So anywhere you read about the Antichrist, you're reading about something deeply, darkly supernatural, which goes right along with what you're saying.
And this is what the church needs to understand, that look, we sit in our churches, we love the Lord, and I get that. But the Lord has told us, Yeshua, Jesus has warned us of what will precede his coming. And as students of the Bible, we would do well to heed those words and actually believe them and maybe do a little bit of research. When he talks about that sentence, men fading from fear from what is coming upon the earth,
wow,
that even the elect would be deceived if that were possible. I mean, think about those warnings that he's talking about. It's dire. It's dire.
I'd like for you to briefly synopsize an account that you had in the company of the late Dr. Roger Lear, who removed, I guess, more than one implant. And you actually documented or photographically documented the removal of an implant. But the implants seem to have characteristics that you can't imagine some small implant having. Tell us about that.
And this is what blows the critics right out of the water, because we did all this on film. And I say we, Richard Shaw, my business partner and director, producer of the Watcher series. When we did all this, it's hardcore physical scientific evidence. First of all, there's an X-ray. Yep, you got a metallic implant.
Okay.
Then there's a CAT scan. Yep, there's that metallic implant. We don't know what it is, but it's there. Then there's a Gauss meter, which measures the magnetic field. Doggone it, that Gauss meter is showing 7.5, 8.0 on milligauss on the Gauss meter.
That's a lot of energy.
That's a lot of energy coming out. A little implant the size of a pencil lead.
Yeah.
Where Richard's camera, which is fully charged in his camera, the battery pack in his camera is like 10 on the Gauss meter. What are we looking at? Then was another test we did, and we found out that it was putting out a frequency of about 330 gigahertz. We're not sure it was a microwave. We're not sure what that was, but how can this little chip do this? Then we take it and it shows up on the ultrasound machine. So, okay, it's there. So 2 weeks later, we take the patient, and by the way, he told us the backstory. When he was 5, he was abducted and taken and implanted. And now it's 40 years later, and he wants it out because this thing is like acting up on him.
It's giving him pain.
Yeah, big pain. Like he described it as a railroad spike being driven through his knee.
Wow.
His words. So we're in the operating theater, and Dr. Matriciano had seen this, had taken the X-ray and shown this, on the ultrasound within a matter of minutes. Found the object within a matter of minutes. Boom, there it is. Okay, we'll see you in 2 weeks. 2 weeks come. There's 3 camera crews. We've got Richard's there. I'm there. We've got Stephen Colburn, Dr. Roger Lear's assisting. We got 15 people in a waiting room looking at a monitor, nurses, administrators, the whole. It's a big production for us. And we go in and we try to find the thing. And he takes the wand from the ultrasound machine, squirts the gel in the guy's leg where the implant is, with a 3-inch by 8-inch section of flesh, and goes over this thing for an hour and a half, hour and 15, 20 minutes. Can't find it. At this point, he looks at Dr. Roger Lear and says, well, maybe we should get another X-ray. Now, I'm a spirit-filled, born-again believer, okay? And I get the little tap on the shoulder. The Holy Spirit tells me his plan is, hey, you need to pray. You need to do it now. I look over at Rick, and without waiting for permission, I just said, this might sound really strange, but I'm in a room full of doctors and surgeons and people who don't know the Lord. And I just said, this might sound weird, but I'm going to pray, and I'm going to do it now. And the prayer went something like this: Father, if there are forces which are cloaking this device, I pray that you would break that and do it soon. Within less than 2 minutes, the object, and Richard has all this on and watches 8. It's just astounding. It just comes up like this on the monitor. It just floats into the view like this. It's just astounding, and it's not supposed to do that.
You use the word cloaking, and to me that's an evocative term, because when I think of demons, the dark side, they're able to cloak themselves and to appear as angels of light even. Satan is said to look like an angel of light, when in fact he is the minion of darkness. Well, this makes this whole phenomenon fit the model, the biblical model. There's that little implant, which we might think of as something from some other galaxy. No. It begins to emerge as a dark force. And for me as a Christian, that means that I can pray to block that force. And I don't have to be afraid of this phenomenon. And I think that really comes out loud and clear.
It does. And prayer changed the whole atmosphere. One prayer evoked a power greater than us, and certainly greater than the fallen ones and what they were doing. And all of a sudden, less than 2 minutes, that object appeared, and everybody just went, whoa. And then Dr. Matriciana kept taking the wand on and off Bill's leg, because he was, why was the machine broken? What's going on? He was astounded. 2 days later, we were in SEAL Lab. The last time I saw Dr. Roger Lear before he passed away. And
L.A., I'm going to have to stop you right there because the clock has caught up.
Okay, great.
It's so great to talk with you.
Thank you, Gary.
By the way, his books, his DVDs, you'll love them. I'm Gary Stearman, and I want you to keep watching, everybody. It's happening. Thanks for joining us on Prophecy Watchers. You can find us on the web at prophecywatchers.com, where you can sign up for our free email newsletter, or follow us at facebook.com/prophecywatchers. In the meantime, keep watching, everybody, and we'll see you soon.